Okay, so this video is going to be talking through sources on Augustus's dynasty. So as you can see, there's quite a variety here. We have Suetonius Augustus, we have 3 different coins, Pliny, an extract from Augustus's funeral speech at Agrippa's funeral, some res gestae, and some little bits of Tacitus. Okay, so we're going to start with the Suetonius source. When we're looking at sources on the dynasty, they're going to be divided into different members of the family. So remember, Agrippa is obviously Augustus's best friend, but he's also his son-in-law because he'd married Julia, Augustus's daughter. So what we're going to see from the first sentence here, it says Augustus's other friends all continued rich and powerful so long as they lived. It's giving you context about some issues that Augustus had with varying friendship, and it talks about how sometimes he was occasionally cool towards his friends. So in this context, he's going to mention his annoyance at Marcus Agrippa's show of impatience and at Maecenas' inability to hold his tongue. So Maecenas was part of Augustus's inner circle. He wasn't directly related to him. He was the one who patroned people like Horace and Virgil. So at some point, it would appear that Maecenas was being a bit gossipy, and that's why he was falling out of favour. And then there was an issue also with Marcus Agrippa showing some impatience. So this next part of the source is going to tell you through the impatience bit. So Agrippa had felt that Augustus was not behaving as warmly towards him as usual, and that Marcellus was being preferred to him. He resigned all of his offices and went off to Mytilene. So Marcellus was Augustus's, I think it's nephew or great nephew, one of the two. And it does appear that Augustus was promoting him, and Agrippa appeared to be quite unhappy about this. So he went off into self-imposed exile and just sort of left. And the story goes that when Marcellus died, Agrippa came straight back again and was happier in the situation. So there does appear to be some kind of inner fighting within the inner circle of Augustus. And it says here, this is what Maecenas had done wrong. So Maecenas was guilty of confiding a state secret to his wife Terentia, mainly that Marina's conspiracy had been disclosed. So remember, previous video talked about the conspiracies, it's the same one. So Augustus expected the affection that he showed his friends to be warmly reciprocated, even in the hour of death. So if you're friends with Augustus, you are supposed to be friendly back to him as much as you can. He did expect people to leave him things in his will, which is what this section here is going to be talking through. So although he's not a legacy hunter, he doesn't like to be shown to be benefiting under a will. But he always made sure he was aware of what was in his friends' deathbed tribute, so their wills. So he's disappointed if they were sort of gave him small requests or small amounts of money, or at least failed to mention his name really sort of in a good way. And he couldn't sort of repress the satisfaction if they'd remembered him really happily. So he's not very good at kind of like playing poker. What we do know is that that people did leave him shares and legacies and promised inheritances, and if they leave him an inheritance of land, for example, Augustus would then resign his rights in favour of the land of the man's grown-up sons or daughters. So these tend to be either equestrians or senators that we're talking about here. So this can be linked into the source material to do with his relationship with the different social groups in Rome, particularly the Senate. So obviously he has a close group of friends. He's promoting his family. So at this point, obviously, Agrippa's stepped down, but he was promoting Agrippa, he was promoting Marcellus, and that's the most important thing to take from that Suetonius section. So on the same sort of vein, we have coin H27. So we have Augustus and Agrippa's tribunes in around 13 BC. This is just before Agrippa died. He dies in 12 BC. The notice on the coin, they are shown as being equal, so they're sitting on the same bench. They're both tribunes. It tells you that Agrippa had been given tribunica parum in 18 and 13. But the important thing is it's reinforcing that Augustus doesn't have full control. He's not fully in power over everybody. He has colleagues and he shares it correctly, hence why they're shown as being equal. We can also use this coin to show that he was promoting Agrippa in part of the government. That's what Augustus was using his family to do, was to kind of ensure his image was put forward correctly. And obviously he's looking for heirs. I mean, Roman men are obsessed with sons, and that is what Augustus is after particularly. So then we move on to looking at Pliny history. And so he's going to talk through very different problems that he was facing in his reign. So this will link to a couple of different topics. So we've got many mutinies in his army, so we can link that to his opposition. He was ill quite a lot of times. He was worried about Marcellus, even though he was promoting him. Disgrace of Agrippa's banishment. This is not referring to, let me just double check, make sure I read this properly. Yes, it's not referring to Agrippa's self-exile up here. That's not the same Agrippa. This is talking about one of his sons, also called Agrippa, who was banished. It talks it through down here. And the fact he's targeted for assassination. So this, we can link some of these into sort of opposition, which is quite helpful. It also shows he's got problems within his family. So he's got accusation he murdered his own children, which he didn't. And he's also very unhappy. There's also an issue with his daughter. So this is Julia the elder, not to confuse us later on. So his daughter was in a really, she was initially married to Marcus Agrippa, and then Agrippa died. Their marriage was very happy. They had 5 children. After he died, she was forced to marry Tiberius Nero, who is Augustus's stepson. These two didn't particularly like each other. They didn't get on. Neither of them wanted to be married to the other one. And during this marriage, she committed adultery. And according to Pliny, she was also plotting to kill her father, Augustus. Now, there's no real evidence for this, but she was definitely having an affair. Now, you've got to remember, under the Julian morality laws, obviously adultery is really strongly punished. You could be put into exile because of it. And obviously this is what happened with Julia. She was forced into exile, which we talked about in a later source. We've also got the fact that his stepson Nero, this is Drusus Nero, who sort of withdrew from public life for a little while. There's his granddaughter, so Julia the Younger, also had an affair. So his family are not living up to Augustus's kind of moral code. They're having affairs and possibly plotting to kill each other, which is obviously not very helpful. There are other problems going on for Augustus, so we haven't got enough money for the army. We've got a rebellion in Illyricum. Remember, Augustus said he claimed that he controlled them. That's what it's referring to. There's a shortage of manpower. There's plague. There's famine. There's decision to commit suicide for their salvation or brought near death. That's not entirely true either. We've also got the disaster with Varus, in Germany. And then we have this mention of the enforced rejection of Agrippa Postumus as his adoption as heir. So Agrippa Postumus is the last son of Marcus Agrippa, named, as I mentioned in the previous video, that he was given the name of Postumus because he was born after Agrippa died. So this particular Agrippa, because he was one of the last male heirs, which we'll explain as we go through all of this, he unfortunately was pretty unpleasant. He was a thug. He was really he was horrible to people, and Augustus decided that he would not be a safe pair of hands to put the empire into, which he was probably correct about. And he actually put Agrippa Postumus into exile as a result of his behaviour, and his behaviour got worse after he was exiled. We've also got the idea that there's another person here called Fabius betraying state secrets. I don't know much about that, but if you want to highlight it in terms of opposition, you can. And then this comes up a lot in the sources. I mentioned this in the previous video about his wife and Tiberius sort of plotting behind the scenes, particularly Livia, to get rid of Augustus and promote Tiberius. And all the sources will say the same thing about Livia, pretty much. Again, remember what I said. So sources don't like powerful women, particularly in Rome. So the idea that he would even listen to his wife showed that he was under her thumb for some reason. So we've got to be careful. There's a lot of, essentially misogyny in the sources towards Livia. I forgot her name for a second, I'm sorry. Right, okay. So eventually he talks about he died with his enemy's own son nominated as heir. That's talking about Tiberius, who becomes the emperor. So you're getting a really good flavour of some of the problems here in his reign, which were quite handy for previous topics, but also within his family. You've got people going around doing lots of really bad things to each other and with people outside marriages. And it causes Augustus a huge amount of embarrassment. And essentially what Augustus is trying to do is make sure he has a male heir. So he's often promoting male relatives in order to sort of adopt them as sons and then pass on the family to them. And he's also aiming to do it through the Julian bloodline first. So remember, this unit's called the Julian Claudian Emperors. It's because the Julian family and the Claudian family came together through his marriage. So Tiberius, who eventually does become emperor, is from the Claudian line. Everyone else he's promoting is from the Julian line, and that's what he's trying to do first. He's trying to promote the Julians first before he even turns to the Claudian family line. So we're going to continue looking at sources with Augustus' funeral oration. So this is at Agrippa's funeral when he died in 12 BC. And it's basically just showing that Agrippa had been promoted. So we've got the tribunicum power is granted to you for a period of 5 years in accordance with the senatorial decree. So again, remember, Augustus is always trying to show that he is essentially not an emperor, that he is being republican, so on and so forth. So it is the Senate that puts him into the tribunicum power. It is not Augustus's decision. It talks about it being ratified by law, fine. And you are raised to the highest position without support and through your own virtues by the agreement of all men. So he is admitting that he was promoted through Augustus' support, but he was done this because of his own virtues and by the fact that the Senate and all the people of Rome agreed with this decision. So we have evidence that Agrippa was being promoted. We should keep in mind as well that Agrippa was really good at his job. He was really good as aedile, so he did some fantastic work with fire services and grain supply. He was particularly good with building works, for example, so he built a lot of aqueducts. They're all in Augustus' name, but it was Agrippa who did all the hard work and did all the organisation for him. So he was promoting like the right person, but he's still promoting a member of his family, which you could easily argue is not particularly Republican, which can be used in the evidence in the sort of the key question about whether or not Augustus restored the Republic. Well, you don't promote people to positions and get them elected early, which is going to be mentioned shortly in another source, if you're being Republican. Talking of which, so we have this particular coin. We have two young men, Gaius and Lucius. So these two are Augustus's grandsons. They are the sons of Julia the Elder and Marcus Agrippa. And they are being promoted. So they are given, I've highlighted here, this particular title. So the Principes Iuventus, sorry, I had to think about how to say that, which basically means leaders of the younger generation. So the princes of youth is another way you can translate it. So they're doing that in order to get their name, to get their name known by the Roman people. So they've been given like official titles. They're not been elected to an office too early, so they're not consuls or anything stupid like that. But they are being promoted. Now, one thing that Romans like to do is the idea that you have to earn power and earn prestige and dignitas. So by giving people titles like these, Augustus is giving members of his family the ability to gain this reputation for themselves. So yes, he's promoting them, but he's also giving them a chance to earn dignitas. And it gets them known, which is what he is doing with these two grandsons here. And then it does mention later on in Res Gestae that my sons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, he did adopt them as his children, who fortune stole from me as youth. They both die in different battles. Were 14. The Senate and the Roman who made them consuls designate on behalf of my honour. So they're not made like consuls, full consuls, but they're sort of given this title. Again, it's a promotion. Notice it's the Senate and the Roman people made them consuls, not Augustus. And they would enter that magistrate after 5 years. So it's kind of like promoting them ahead of time. So in 5 years' time, when they're 19, they would have been made consuls to sort of work with Augustus in controlling the state. And it's Senate decree that on that day they'll be led into the forum. They'll be included in public councils. They'll be part of the sort of discussions running the city. And moreover, the Roman knights together named each of them first of the youth and gave them shields and spears. That was really hard to say. So I'm going to highlight the idea that we have the Senate decreeing that they were led into the forum and made in public councils, because again, it's the promotion into governments, which is the key thing here. Then we have the slightly more interesting tale of the two Julias. So remember, Julia the Elder was forced to marry Tiberius and then had an affair. And this was really bad for Augustus, really embarrassing. And his granddaughter, also had an affair. So both called Julia, both do slightly different things, but essentially the same basic issue. So it talks about Augustus' constant good fortune in his public life was offset by the failings with his own household. This is where it's embarrassing. So the scandalous conduct of his daughter and granddaughter led to their banishment from Rome and the execution or exile of their lovers. I don't think it needs particularly explaining. It is just obvious. So although adultery is common enough, Augustus branded it as sacrilege and high treason. To be slightly fair to Augustus, he didn't have much choice here. He had passed the Julian morality laws, which essentially made adultery illegal. And to be showing that, he's a good Republican and it's all for the greater good of Rome, he has to follow through on his own punishment, which is why his daughter and his granddaughter were exiled. So just be aware of that. So we got the idea that they were maybe being punished a little bit more heavily. Women were always punished more heavily. So, for example, we've got Decimus Silanus, who was one of the people having adultery with the granddaughter. So he just isn't allowed to be within Augustus' inner circle. But he had the good sense to realise this meant exile, so he also left Rome. Then we get a little tiny bit more detail about Agrippa and Julia. So Julia the elder bore Agrippa 3 sons. You've got Gaius Lucius and Agrippa Postumus, and 2 daughters, Julia the younger and Agrippina the elder. Agrippina the elder will come back to us later on in this context. Oh, that didn't make any sense. Will come back to us much later when we talk about other emperors. That made more sense. Okie dokies. So we have sort of varying marriages that we don't need to be very aware of. We have the fact he adopted Gaius and Lucius and brought them up in the palace. Just buying them from Agrippa by token sale. That's quite common. He's not being weird and just buying his children. He trained his new sons in the business of government while they were still young. So again, we've got that kind of promotion of them. So we've got them being sent as commander-in-chief to provinces. He also the source talks through a bit about education. It's sort of known that he sort of almost overeducated his daughter, Julia the elder. She was very bright. She was taught to read and write, which is not as common with sort of Roman women, even including spinning and weaving. But they were really, really tightly controlled. And people sort of discuss that maybe this is the reason why Julia sort of rebelled the way she did. Her life was very, very controlled by Augustus. It won't come as a massive shock to you that Augustus was particularly controlling in life in general. So they have to sort of make sure anything they say has to be able to be written down in the imperial daybook. If they form friends without his consent, they'll be punished. They have to do exactly what they're told. And it's believed that kind of on top of this marriage that Julia had to have with Tiberius, it was like the final straw, and she rebelled and started having affairs. At least one, possibly 2. Some sources exaggerate it and say she had sex with half the Senate, and that's not true. But she certainly had at least one affair, and that was obviously very embarrassing for the family. And then we move on. So he came to the conclusion that the elder, so Julia the elder, and the younger Julia both been indulging every sort of vice and banished them, i.e. they had an affair. Gaius dies in this province, and then Lucius dies in another province. There's some sources that sort of suggest, we haven't got these sources, but there are sources that suggest that Livia somehow was behind it all. How she would have been behind it when they both died in battle is not the point. We've got Augustus publicly adopted his remaining grandchild Agrippa Postumus, and at the same time his stepson Tiberius. And unfortunately, he has to disinherit Postumus, whose behaviour become vulgar and brutal, and sent him off because he was seen as too dangerous. Okay, so when members of the family died, Augustus bore this brief more than resignation than they discarded themselves. It was very difficult for him. The deaths of Julius and Lucius did not break his spirit. After discovering his daughter Julia's adulteries, he refused to see Senate visitors for some time. So he took it really badly. He sort of wrote to the Senate about it. He even considered killing her. He wanted her to commit suicide, which is what this is talking about. But in the end, she was exiled to an island, and she was forbidden to drink wine or enjoy any luxury, denied any men at all. And if you wanted to visit the island, you had to literally meet Augustus and be told of their age, their height, complexion, any marks on their body. So she was kept in the prison island for 5 years, and eventually she was moved to the mainland where she had some slightly better treatment. He never forgave her, which is what this is talking through. He basically never spoke to her ever again. It was very difficult. I feel very sorry for Julia the elder. And Julia the younger also gave birth to a son, and Augustus refused to sort of acknowledge it even existed. We've also got issue with Agrippa Postumus' conduct, so far improving grew daily more responsible. So he was also taken to an island and put there under military surveillance. He was too dangerous to be allowed to become emperor. So this is, it's not I suppose it's kind of like a soap opera of a family. You've got people having affairs left, right and centre. You've got people dying, possibly murdered, but probably just dying in battle. You've got sort of a thug running around being a bit of a nutcase. It's not a surprise Augustus was a bit sort of like depressed at times. So in the end, he has to turn to Tiberius. So when he basically ran out of Julian heirs, because they're all dead or exiled, he then adopts Tiberius fully and starts to promote him. So we have Germanicus, Augustus' great nephew, is universally admired, and Augustus toyed with the idea of making the rule of the emperor. So this is another of Livia's sons, the younger, I think, from memory, can't remember. However, he was dissuaded by entries of his wife Livia and said adopted Tiberius. So again, it's playing into that idea that Livia was just out to get Tiberius adopted. As like I said, she probably wanted a son to be looked after, but whether she wanted him to be the heir and killed all the rest of them is highly unlikely. Key thing again, we've got the idea of Tiberius being promoted. So you've got Augustus on one side, you've got Tiberius on the other side, being shown as equal. They're working together. Tiberius gets a name. We've also got this bit here that we have Tiberius is now the son of Augustus. Hang on, I'm deciding which bit to highlight. So he's been officially adopted, and this is what this coin is pointing out, that he's been promoted. Then we've got the last little bit with Tacitus. So we've got about this time Tiberius commended Germanicus' son Nero to the favour of the Senate when he just come of age, and asked that he be exempt from service on the board of 20 and be allowed to stand for quaestorship 5 years earlier than the law allowed. The request was greeted with a degree of mockery, so the Senate weren't happy with this. But Tiberius cited as a precedent the similar concession gained by Augustus for himself and his brother. So again, it's just showing really this sentence here that Augustus had promoted Tiberius and Drusus Nero ahead of age in order to get them known in Rome in preparation for them to be taken over. And that is essentially it. That's him justifying this particular sort of promotion of Germanicus' son. So I hope you've got a decent picture of the family. So it's quite complicated. You've got daughters and granddaughters sort of having fun with lots of people. You've got sons, grandsons, adopted sons then being killed off, and then eventually Tiberius Nero being adopted as the heir and eventually becomes the emperor later on. And that's it for these sources.